On an autumn night, when the dry leaves danced in the wind, a distant echo whispered a disturbing question. What if the city of dreams became the city of fear? Hollow Creek, a forgotten locality shrouded in mystery and shadows, awaited a new visitor. Rumors of disappearances and unexplained events haunted the few who still remembered its existence. The dilapidated houses, enveloped in thick fog, seemed to cry out for help, while echoes of long-silenced children's laughter resonated like a tragic melody. In the heart of this forgotten town, a man named Edgar, a history teacher with a restless mind and a vulnerable spirit, felt drawn by an indescribable force. He had always been fascinated by urban legends and unsolved mysteries, but the quest for truth led him to Hollow Creek, where the shadows seemed deeper and the secrets darker. He carried with him the weight of his personal failures, a crumbling marriage and an uncertain future, the desire to escape his monotonous life and discover something extraordinary followed him like a shadow. As soon as Edgar arrived in the town, a strange and uncomfortable sensation washed over him. The air felt heavy, and an unsettling silence enveloped the deserted streets. The houses, with their broken windows and creaking doors, seemed to watch his every move, as if they were alive, absorbing each step he took. On a corner, a rusted sign announced the old library, a place that, according to rumors, held deep secrets about the inhabitants of Hollow Creek. Driven by a mixture of curiosity and fear, Edgar decided to explore the library. Upon opening the door, a smell of mold and aged paper hit him like a blow. The shelves were covered in dust, and the dim light filtered through windows coated in cobwebs. As he explored, a particular book caught his attention, The Legends of Hollow Creek. With trembling hands, he pulled it from the shelf, and as he opened the cover, felt a shiver run down his spine. The pages were filled with stories of mysterious disappearances and supernatural encounters, each account more disturbing than the last. As he read, a sense of urgency began to grow within him. One passage in particular spoke of an entity that inhabited the forest surrounding the town, a dark figure that lured the unsuspecting to never be seen again. Edgar couldn't tear his eyes away from the text, as if an invisible force compelled him to continue. With every word read, the line between reality and the supernatural grew increasingly thin, and the town, once just a dot on a map, now pulsed with a life of its own. When night fell, Edgar decided to explore the forest mentioned in the book. The tall, dark trees formed a canopy that blocked the moonlight, plunging him into an oppressive darkness. He walked cautiously, each step echoing like a call in the silent night. Fear began to creep into his mind, but curiosity pushed him onward. What would he find there? Would the legend become his reality? Suddenly, a distant sound interrupted his thoughts. A whisper, as if someone were calling his name. Edgar stopped, his heart racing. Edgar! The voice seemed to come from all directions, enveloping him in a chilling embrace. He hesitated, but the need to uncover the truth drew him toward the sound. He found himself in a clearing where a hooded figure stood out against the darkness. The entity, a presence that appeared to be made of shadows, watched him with empty but penetrating eyes. "You came seeking answers," the figure whispered, its voice sounding like a distant echo from the past. "But some truths are better left buried." Edgar felt a wave of dread and despair. What had he awakened? He tried to step back, but his legs felt rooted to the ground. The entity approached, and in a moment of desperation, Edgar remembered the stories he had read. He needed to confront his fears, but how could he fight against something so primordial? As the entity extended its hand, a fleeting memory of his previous life crossed his mind. The joy of teaching, the laughter of his students, the lost love. With one last effort, he shouted, "I'm not just a spectator, I am more than that." The declaration seemed to resonate in the darkness, and the figure hesitated. Edgar realized he was not only fighting against the entity, but also against his own vulnerability and the ghosts of his past. The entity recoiled, as if the light of his determination had made a crack in the darkness. "You are stronger than you think," it murmured before disappearing into the mist of the forest. Edgar fell to his knees, exhausted but with a newfound understanding. Hollow Creek, with all its mysteries and shadows, was not just a place of terror, but a reflection of his own internal struggles. The next morning, as the sunlight began to illuminate the forgotten town, Edgar left Hollow Creek with a sense of renewal. He had faced his fears, and in doing so, discovered that the true battle was within himself. The town, though marked by suffering, was also a testament to human resilience. And as he walked away, the shadows that had once surrounded him seemed less threatening, as if they had finally found a bit of light. Edgar left the clearing, still dazed by the experience. The echo of the dark voice resonated in his mind, but now there was a new determination in his heart. He needed to understand more about Hollow Creek, and the feeling that his time in the town was far from over weighed on him. The story he sought was not just an academic curiosity, but something deeply rooted in the very essence of the place. When he returned to the library, Edgar felt that the atmosphere had changed. The air was denser, almost palpable, and the books seemed to whisper secrets he couldn't comprehend. He headed to the section of ancient records, where he hoped to find clues about the disappearances that haunted the town. Flipping through yellowed pages, he found accounts of residents who had vanished without a trace. Some mentioned a hooded figure, while others spoke of voices calling at night. As Edgar lost himself in the intertwining stories with reality, a noise interrupted his focus. He turned and saw a weary-looking woman with eyes that carried the shadow of many nightmares. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Hollow Creek is not a safe place." Intrigued, Edgar asked who she was. The woman introduced herself as Martha, one of the few who still lived in the town. "I know the legends," she said, glancing around as if fearing someone might overhear them. "The disappearances, the voices, it's all real. And you attract their attention." Martha's warning made Edgar's heart race. He wanted to understand more, but the idea of being a target left him uneasy. "What do you know about the hooded figure?" he asked, curiosity overcoming his fear. "She is the guardian of Hollow Creek's secrets," Martha explained, her voice barely above a whisper. "They say she feeds on fears and insecurities. Those who see her are condemned to face not only the town, but the darkness within themselves. You had an encounter with her, didn't you?" Edgar nodded in confirmation, the memory of the clearing still fresh in his mind. "But I managed to confront her," he said, trying to find some certainty in his own voice. I am not weak." "But you are not free from her," Martha warned, her expression serious. "The entity knows your weaknesses. You may have resisted once, but she will return, and next time it could be different." Edgar felt a chill run down his spine. He needed more information, and it was clear that Martha knew more than she was willing to reveal. What happened to the others, those who disappeared? Martha hesitated, as if battling painful memories. "Some were taken, others became part of the town itself. The shadows you see in the streets at night, they are the echoes of those who have gone. You can see them, but you cannot save them." Martha's words heightened Edgar's sense of urgency. He began to realize that he was not just seeking answers, but entangled in a mystery that transcended him. The town, with its ghosts and secrets, seemed to want him to be a part of it, and that idea terrified him. "We need to find a way to break this cycle," Edgar said, determined. "If there are traces, if there is still hope, we must find them." Martha hesitated, but finally relented. "There is an ancient legend about a lost artifact, a key that could seal the entity and free Hollow Creek from its curse. But many have tried and failed. The forest is treacherous, and the path to find it is fraught with dangers." Edgar felt a new wave of determination. "I have no choice. If there's a chance to free this town and those trapped in it, I must try." Martha looked at him with concern, but also with a hint of hope. "If you decide to move forward, don't go alone. The town is alive, and the forest does not forgive the reckless." With a plan in mind, Edgar said goodbye to Martha and left the library. He needed allies, people who could help him face the challenges ahead. As he walked through the deserted streets, he began to notice that the town seemed to watch him with renewed intensity. Shadows danced on the walls of the houses, and the wind carried echoes of laughter and laments. Edgar decided to visit the only tavern in town, a place where the few inhabitants gathered. Upon entering, he was met with suspicious looks. The atmosphere was heavy, and conversation ceased momentarily. He approached the bar and ordered a drink. The bartender, an elderly man with a weary gaze, seemed to know more than he was willing to say. "You're not from around here, are you?" he asked, sizing up Edgar. "What's a stranger doing in Hollow Creek?" "I'm here to help," Edgar replied, trying to sound confident. "I want to understand the disappearances and what's happening in this town." The bartender let out a bitter laugh. "Help? No one can help Hollow Creek. The town is a place of secrets, and those who meddle where they don't belong often disappear." Edgar didn't let that discourage him. "I'm not afraid. I've already faced the entity that haunts this town." The bartender's eyes widened at the mention of the hooded figure. "So you're either a fool or a brave man. Either way, you need allies. Talk to those who still have the courage to face the unknown." With those words, the bartender gestured to a table in the corner, where a group of 3 people was conversing in low tones. Edgar approached, feeling the tension in the air. He knew that to unravel the mysteries of Hollow Creek, he would need courage and support, for the town would not allow him to simply walk away unscathed. The tales of disappearances and an entity that fed on fears were more than urban legends. They were a warning. The line between what was real and what was supernatural was becoming increasingly blurred, and Edgar was about to plunge even deeper into an abyss of mysteries that could cost him not only his life, but also the sanity of his soul. Time was running out, and the town, with all its shadows, seemed to await him with a sinister smile. Edgar approached the table where the group was conversing. All 3 gazes turned to him, a mix of curiosity and distrust on their faces. He introduced himself, sharing his quest for answers about the disappearances and the entity that seemed to haunt the town. One of the men, with disheveled hair and deep, dark circles under his eyes, was the first to speak. "You are not the first to seek this," he said, his voice raspy. "Many have tried to understand what happens here, but the truth is that Hollow Creek has a way of swallowing those who dare to delve too deeply." Edgar felt a chill run down his spine, but he did not let himself be intimidated. "I have already faced the entity. I won't give up now." The woman at the table, with a hardened look and an air of skepticism, crossed her arms. "And what do you know about her?" "Many believe the hooded figure is the very reflection of the worst in us. You may have looked at her, but that doesn't mean you escape unscathed." Edgar hesitated, her words resonating in his mind. It was true that he had felt the weight of his own fears and insecurities during that encounter, but he wanted to believe that his determination made him strong enough to overcome any challenge. "We need to find the lost artifact. It's the only way to free the town," he insisted, trying to inject some hope into the conversation. The others exchanged glances, and the disheveled man finally stood up. "If you are truly willing to pursue this, then we will need a plan. The forest surrounding Hollow Creek is not just treacherous. It is alive. The paths change, and the trees seem to have a mind of their own." A sense of despair began to settle in Edgar's heart. He was not only facing a supernatural entity, but also the relentless nature that surrounded the town. "And if we find the artifact, what happens next?" "If we succeed," the woman began, her expression softening slightly, "we may have a chance against the entity. But you must understand that this is not just a physical journey. It is an internal struggle. The entity feeds on our fears. You will have to confront not only what is outside, but also what is inside you." Edgar felt the weight of those words. He thought of his own life, of the insecurities that haunted him, of the failures that tormented him, but he had no time to hesitate. "Let's prepare," he ordered, his voice firmer than he felt. The four spent the following hours discussing strategies and gathering supplies. However, as night approached, Edgar began to notice that the town was changing around him. The shadows on the walls seemed longer, and a biting cold enveloped the air. He felt that something was about to happen. When darkness finally fell, a scream echoed through the tavern, causing everyone to turn. A woman burst in, wide-eyed and breathless. "She's coming! The entity is coming!" Edgar felt a cold knot in his stomach. "What do you mean by that?" he asked, trying to remain calm. "I saw her. She was in the forest, watching me. I couldn't move. It was like I was trapped in a horrible dream." The panic in the woman's voice made Edgar feel an instant connection to his own encounter with the entity. The group quickly organized, deciding they could not wait. They headed into the forest, armed with flashlights and courage. The atmosphere around them seemed to pulse with a strange energy, as if the forest itself was aware of their intentions. As they advanced, Edgar began to notice subtle changes in the nature around him. The trees seemed to lean toward them, the branches cracking as if they wanted to block or guide them away. He felt the rising pressure of the entity, as if it were getting closer, watching every move. Soon they arrived at a clearing that Edgar vaguely recognized. It was the same place where he had faced the hooded figure. The feeling of déjà vu hit him, and he realized that the entity was not only linked to Hollow Creek, it was linked to him, to his deepest fears. "We're close," one of the men said, his voice tense. "The artifact must be here." But before they could search, a cold wind swept through the clearing, and the hooded figure appeared before them, more imposing than before. Edgar felt his heart race, and the memory of his first encounter came flooding back. He was no longer the same, but the entity seemed to know his insecurities. "You dared to come here again?" The voice resonated deep and echoing, causing everyone present to shudder. "Do you believe you can break the cycle? I am what you fear. I am what you are." Edgar realized that the struggle would not be just against the entity, but against everything it represented. The panic and insecurity he had held for so long began to surface, and he fought to maintain his composure. He could not let his weaknesses dominate him. "We cannot turn back," he declared, his voice stronger than he felt. "We are here to free Hollow Creek and ourselves. We will not give up." However, Edgar's words seemed only to provoke the entity, which smiled sinisterly. "Then come, face what you truly are." The battle was just beginning, and Edgar felt that the true test was yet to come. He was not only fighting for Hollow Creek, but for his own soul, and the forest around them seemed to vibrate with the tension of the moment. The shadow of the entity loomed closer, and he knew that to win, he would have to confront his own demons. The hooded figure floated before them, its shadows dancing around the clearing as if they were alive. Edgar felt his heart pounding frantically in his chest, and the pressure of terror grew with each passing moment. The entity was not just a manifestation of the fears he carried. It was a force that transcended his understanding. "Do you believe you can challenge me?" The voice resonated again, and this time there was a tone of amusement. "You are weaker than you think." Edgar's companions involuntarily recoiled, but he stood firm. "We know who you are. We know what you represent." His voice, though trembling, carried a thread of determination. But at that moment, something unexpected happened. An intense light emerged in the clearing, illuminating the entity and revealing an image Edgar had never expected to see. At the center of the glow, a familiar figure emerged, a woman with black hair and piercing eyes. It was Clara, his sister who had disappeared years ago. "Clara," Edgar whispered, incredulous. Shock coursed through his body. He hadn't thought of Clara since he began his search, but now she was there, in front of him, surrounded by a light that seemed to repel the entity's darkness. "Edgar, you need to listen," Clara said, her voice clear and firm. "The entity is more than you think. It is not just a reflection of what you fear, it is the guardian of secrets you have yet to uncover." The other members of the group looked at Clara, confused and haunted. The disheveled-haired man, who had been so sure that everything was a matter of physical confrontation, now seemed lost. "Clara, you're alive?" "Alive. Not in this way," she replied, the expression of pain and wisdom on her face. "I was captured by the entity, made a part of it, but it's not just that. The truth is that the entity feeds on disappearances, on the despair of those who are swallowed by the forest. It is not just a monster, it is a system, a force that keeps Hollow Creek trapped." Edgar felt the ground beneath his feet wobble. He had always thought of the entity as an enemy to be defeated, but now he realized it was also a consequence of something much deeper and more complex. "What do you mean by system?" "It feeds on emotions, on fears, on the pain that disappearances bring," Clara explained, her eyes shining with an almost supernatural intensity. "And the more people disappear, the stronger it becomes. You, Edgar, have become a target because you are about to break the cycle. Your determination frightens it. But how can we defeat it if it feeds on pain and fear?" Edgar asked, the reality of the situation weighing on him like a stone. "We need to dismantle the cycle," Clara said, looking at the group. "To do this, you must confront not just the entity, but the pain it represents. Each of you has your own fears, your own pains. Only by facing this together can we weaken it." The other group members were silent, absorbing the revelation. The woman who had once been skeptical now seemed vulnerable, and the disheveled-haired man looked at Edgar with new understanding. "If we are to face our fears, we must do it now. We cannot let it dominate us." The entity, watching everything, let out a dark laugh. "You think you can unite against me? You have no idea what you are about to face. I am the sum of all your terrors, and that makes me invincible." Edgar felt the pressure of fear tighten in his chest, but he could no longer hesitate. "If you are the sum of our fears, then we need to unite. Clara, can you help us face this?" "Yes," she replied, the light around her pulsing like a beacon. "But you will have to be honest with each other. Face what you hide within yourselves. Only then can we weaken it." The group gathered, forming a circle around Clara. Edgar began to speak about his insecurities, about the pressure he felt to be perfect, about the fear of never being enough. One by one, they began to share their truths, their pains, and with each word, the light around Clara grew. The entity writhed, rage echoing in its voice throughout the forest. "You have no idea what you are doing. You cannot do this." But Edgar felt that the energy was shifting. As they spoke, the darkness began to recede. The ground beneath their feet trembled, and the trees around them seemed to whisper as if supporting their struggle. "Keep going," Clara exclaimed. "Don't stop." And so they continued, facing their fears and sharing their truths. The clearing began to glow intensely, and the entity, now in a panic, started to unravel, as if being pulled back into the shadows. But before the light could consume it completely, the entity issued one last warning. "You may have won this battle, but the war is not over. I will always be with you, in the shadows, waiting." The light exploded into a blinding brilliance, and everything around them became a whirlwind of colors and emotions. Edgar felt himself being pulled, and when the light finally dissipated, he found himself alone in the clearing. The entity vanished, but the sense that the struggle was far from over remained like a weight in his heart. Edgar was alone in the clearing, surrounded by the oppressive stillness of the forest. The battle with the entity seemed to have ended, but the victory was far from sweet. The echo of his friends' voices still reverberated in his mind, and the image of Clara, his sister, still shone in his memory. Her words, which resonated like a mantra, "Only by facing this together can we weaken it," hung heavily in the air. But now he was alone, and the feeling of loss and despair began to seep into his heart. He looked around, the shadows of the trees seeming to shorten as daylight began to fade. What had he done? The clearing that had once been filled with hope now seemed like a desolate battlefield. Edgar felt the growing pressure in his chest, a mix of guilt and fear as he began to question his choices. Had he made the right decision by confronting the entity? What if he had left Clara behind, trapped in the darkness? As he pondered, a whisper cut through the silence. A soft, almost melodic sound seemed to call his name. He turned, searching for the source, but there was no one. The whisper continued, more insistent, and a sense of urgency began to take hold of Edgar. He needed to understand what was happening and what this entity that now inhabited his mind had become. Driven by curiosity and the need for answers, he followed the sound. The forest, once familiar, was now becoming a labyrinth of shadows and illusions. Each step he took felt heavy, as if the very ground was trying to hold him back. He was being tested in a way he had never imagined, but the whisper grew stronger, clearer. "Edgar, come, discover the truth." It was Clara's voice, but there was something different about it, a tone of urgency that made him hesitate. He remembered her words about the entity being a guardian of secrets. Could it be possible that she was still trapped in some way, trying to guide or warn him? He struggled to stay focused, but anxiety began to corrode his determination. "If I can't understand this, I will be consumed," he thought. Edgar was fighting a double battle, one against the entity and another against the darkness within himself. He needed clarity, a solution that wouldn't lead him to a grim fate. Finally, he arrived at a small clearing where the light seemed to shine brightly. In the center lay an ancient stone covered in symbols that appeared to pulse with their own energy. Edgar approached, curiosity overcoming fear. As he touched the stone, visions began to dance before his eyes. He saw people disappearing, whispers of pain and despair echoing in his mind. He saw Clara, trapped in a state between life and death, trying to free herself from the entity. The vision changed abruptly. Now he saw the entity, not as a threatening figure, but as a shadow of sadness and pain. Edgar realized that the entity was not just an evil being. It was a reflection of all the lost souls, all the unaddressed fears. The pain it caused was the same kind of pain it suffered. "You cannot save everyone." A deep, echoing voice resonated in the clearing. It was the entity, manifesting in a way he had never seen before. "You are trapped between light and darkness, and your struggle is in vain. For every soul you try to save, another will be lost." Edgar felt the pressure of despair. He was in a dead end, and the thought that all his efforts could be in vain made him doubt himself. "What if I fail? What if I can't save Clara or the others?" "This is what you fear," the entity said, its tone almost gentle now. "You fear not being enough, but the real question is, are you willing to sacrifice yourself to break the cycle? You can become part of the solution or remain trapped in your pain." The clearing began to tremble. Edgar felt the ground open beneath his feet as the battle between light and darkness intensified. He needed to act, to find a solution that involved not just fighting, but also confronting his own weaknesses. He remembered Clara's words. They needed to unite, not just with others, but also with himself. "If I want to break this, I need to accept my fears," he thought. "I need to face them head on." With this idea in mind, Edgar took a deep breath and focused. He began to speak, not to the entity, but to himself. "I am afraid of failing. I am afraid of losing those I love. But I cannot let that define me. I am stronger than my fears." The clearing exploded with light, and the entity began to writhe, as if in agony. Edgar realized that by confronting his truth, he was weakening the entity, but he also knew that the path ahead would not be easy. The entity might have been hurt, but it was not defeated. He would have to prepare for a final confrontation, where not only his sanity would be at stake, but the lives of everyone he loved. The light around him began to dissipate, and the forest seemed to return to normal, but the fight was far from over. Edgar knew that the real challenge was just beginning, and he would have to gather his friends again, face the entity, and discover what it truly meant to be free. Edgar felt the light around him fade, as if the forest itself was breathing, preparing for something darker. The clearing, which had once seemed a temporary refuge, was now transforming into a battlefield. The entity, weakened but not defeated, writhed in a spectre of pain and fury, its dark eyes fixed on Edgar as if it could read his deepest thoughts. The pressure in his chest increased, and the guilt he had tried to confront now manifested as a shadow, weighing heavily on his shoulders. He remembered every moment he hadn't been there for Clara, every time he hesitated to protect those he loved. The entity seemed to feed off these weaknesses, growing stronger with each unresolved feeling. "You will never escape what you feel," the entity's voice echoed, now clearer and more penetrating, like a war cry. "Every step you take is a step toward your own failure." Edgar blinked, stifling the wave of despair that threatened to submerge him. He could not let himself be defeated. The memory of his sister, her smile, her unconditional love, cut through the darkness like a blade. "I cannot fail. I cannot leave her behind," he thought, determination beginning to form in his heart. But the battle was far from easy. The forest around him began to writhe, the trees bending as if they wanted to crush him. The entity was feeding off the tension, the pain he still carried. Every shadow seemed to come alive, each whisper turning into a scream of despair, challenging his sanity. "You cannot save everyone," the entity insisted, its voice now a nearly seductive whisper. "For every soul you try to rescue, a new one will be lost. You are just a man, Edgar, and men are fragile." He felt the truth in those words, a poison seeping into his mind. Doubt began to corrode the determination he had found. What if he wasn't strong enough? What if Clara was truly lost forever? He looked at the entity, which was now approaching, its form distorting into a tangle of shadows. Fear, more than anything else, seemed to be what fed it. "You are a failure," the entity growled, and Edgar felt the truth behind the statement. Guilt, fear, loneliness, all of it joined together in a brutal assault on his mind, an internal battle that was becoming increasingly difficult to bear. He needed to choose, surrender to despair, or fight against it with everything he had. "I am not a failure," he said, his voice trembling but firm. "I can face my fears. I can face you." But as the words left his mouth, he wondered if he truly believed them. The entity laughed, a laughter that echoed through the trees, distorting the sounds of the forest around him. "You think you can confront me? I am the reflection of your weaknesses. I am inside you, Edgar. You will never defeat me. For every step you take toward the light, I pull you back into the darkness." The clearing began to tremble more violently, and Edgar found himself surrounded by a storm of shadows, each representing a fear of his, a doubt. He saw Clara in the darkness, her face contorted in pain. "Edgar, help me," she screamed, but her voice mingled with the entity's dark laughter. "You cannot save her," the entity whispered, its eyes shining with insatiable malice. "She is lost, just like all the others. You are the only one who hasn't realized it yet." The pressure mounted to the point where Edgar felt he could no longer endure. He saw flashes of his friends, all disappearing one by one, swallowed by the darkness. Guilt turned into a storm inside him. He was not only responsible for Clara's loss, but for the pain of all those he had left behind. "It's time to face the truth," the entity continued, its voice now an echo resonating in his mind. "You are alone. You always have been. What are you really, Edgar? A hero? A savior? Or just a fragile man fighting against a battle you can never win?" He felt the darkness tighten around him, almost as if the forest itself was trying to swallow him whole. It was a crucial moment. He had to make a choice. Surrender to despair, or find the strength he didn't know he possessed. "I am more than this," he declared, his voice rising above the chaos. "I am the sum of all those I have loved and still love. I cannot leave them behind. I cannot allow you to win." With a cry of determination, Edgar began to move, each step an act of resistance against the entity. He remembered Clara, his friends, and the light that had always existed even in the darkest hours. The clearing began to glow again, a light emanating from within him, challenging the darkness. But the entity was not willing to yield easily. The shadows grew denser, more aggressive, trying to envelop him in a suffocating embrace. Edgar felt the internal struggle intensify, a battle between his will and the overwhelming force of the entity. "You cannot win!" the entity screamed, its form distorting into a frenzy of rage. "You are doomed to fail!" "No!" Edgar refused to listen. He was in a war, not just against the entity, but against his own weaknesses. He stopped, took a deep breath, and let the light inside him expand, a burning flame illuminating the darkness around him. "I'm stronger than you think," he proclaimed, confidence growing within him like a powerful wave. "I am not alone. I never was." The shadows began to recede, and the clearing lit up with an intense light, a light that not only illuminated but burned the darkness. Edgar realized it was the union of his emotions, his memories, that was making him strong. He was ready to confront the entity head-on, and nothing could stop him now. The battle was far from over, but Edgar knew he was finally on the right path. He was not just fighting for himself, but for everyone he loved. And with that renewed determination, he prepared for the final confrontation. The fight for freedom was just beginning, but he was more than ready. The clearing pulsed with an intensity almost palpable, as if the very earth was aware of what was about to happen. Edgar, now surrounded by a halo of light, faced the entity writhing before him, its dark forms twisting in a grotesque dance of despair and rage. The air was thick with tension, and each breath Edgar took seemed to echo in the somber silence of the forest. The entity, sensing the change in the man's spirit, let out a guttural scream that reverberated through the trees. "You really believe your light can defeat me? I'm the darkness in your soul. I'm your unresolved memories, your weaknesses. You cannot defeat me." Edgar advanced, each step an act of defiance. "I'm not just my weaknesses, I'm also my hopes, my loves, the memories that sustain me." His voice resonated with renewed strength, and the light within him began to shine more brightly. He remembered Clara, the laughter they shared, the moments of unconditional love. "I won't let you take her from me." The entity hesitated, as if Edgar's words caused its form to waver. But in an instant, the darkness stirred, and the entity lunged forward, its shadowy claws aimed at Edgar's chest. He had only a second to react, but the determination pulsing within him guided him. With a swift movement, he raised his hand, channeling the light that had accumulated inside him. An explosion of light burst forth, dazzling the entity and causing it to momentarily retreat. Edgar could feel the energy vibrating in his veins, a powerful force that not only illuminated the clearing, but seemed to radiate through the forest itself. "You cannot control me. I am stronger than you think," he shouted, challenging the darkness. But the entity would not be easily defeated. With a deafening scream, it regrouped, reshaping itself into an even more menacing form. "You do not know what you are doing, Edgar. For every act of light, there is a corresponding shadow. For every victory, a defeat. You cannot escape from yourself." Edgar felt the truth in the entity's words, a bitter truth that threatened to bring him down. He remembered every mistake, every moment he had felt powerless. Guilt and fear stirred within him, trying to pull him back into the darkness. But he refused to give in. "I'm not perfect, but I am human, and that means I can change, that I can fight." With a cry of determination, he moved forward again, the light in his hand expanding like a beacon amidst the storm. He recalled every person he loved, every laugh, every hug, and as those memories surfaced, the light intensified, burning the shadows around him. The entity, sensing the growing threat, lunged at him with renewed fury. The shadowy claws sliced through the air, but Edgar was ready. He raised his hands, and a wave of light erupted from his being, colliding with the darkness in a titanic clash. The impact was colossal. The clearing trembled, trees bending around as light and darkness intertwined in a dance of strength and power. Edgar felt the struggle within himself, the battle between the light representing his hopes and the darkness symbolizing his doubts. He knew that this fight was more than physical. It was a battle for his soul. "I am more than my failures," he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "I am a warrior, and I will fight for those I love." The light exploded in a blinding brilliance, and for a moment the entity faltered. Edgar saw weakness and uncertainty in its eyes. Without hesitation, he charged forward, the light like a sword in his hand. He remembered Clara, and the image of her propelled him further. "I will not leave her behind." With a decisive movement, Edgar hurled the light at the entity, which began to fade under the intensity of the glow. The shadows surrounding it started to dissolve, and the entity screamed, a sound of despair and rage that echoed through the forest. "You cannot defeat me. I am part of you." "Not anymore," Edgar declared, his voice firm. "I am not just what you represent. I am the sum of everything I choose to be." The light expanded, engulfing the darkness and making the entity writhe in agony. Edgar felt a weight lift from his shoulders, the guilt and fear dissipating like mist in the sun. He was winning. The clearing was illuminated like never before, and at the peak of the struggle, he realized that true strength came from his acceptance of being human, from his imperfections and his ability to love. Finally, with one last cry of fury, the entity vanished in a burst of shadows, and the clearing fell silent. Edgar, now panting, fell to his knees, the light inside him still pulsing, but now in a state of tranquility. He had won, not only the battle against the entity, but also against his own demons. The forest around him began to restore itself, the trees rising again, and the sunlight filtering through the leaves, bringing new life to the place. Clara, in his mind, smiled at him, and he knew that although the struggle had been hard, the victory meant that he could finally move on. Edgar remained on his knees in the clearing, his heart still racing from the battle he had just fought. The light that once radiated from him now softened, like twilight after an intense day. The clearing, which had once been the stage for his fight against darkness, now seemed a sanctuary of tranquility, but the peace did not extend to his interior. He felt the scars of that experience forming, not only on his body, but most importantly, on his soul. The memories of the entity still echoed in his mind, the cutting words reminding him of his weaknesses and failures. He had faced the darkness that resided within him, but that did not mean it had disappeared completely. There was a sense of loss accompanying him, as if a part of him had been torn away during the confrontation. The victory, though glorious, left a bitter taste in his mouth. He struggled to his feet, feeling pain in every muscle and joint. The marks of battle were visible. Some physical scars were already beginning to form on his skin, like indelible reminders of his struggle. But the emotional scars were deeper. There was a weight in his chest that seemed unwilling to dissipate, a shadow that followed him like a silent specter. The memory of the entity haunted him, not as a defeated enemy, but as a reflection of his own insecurities. Edgar looked around, absorbing the restored beauty of the forest. The trees, once threatening, now stood majestic under the sunlight filtering through the leaves. But he knew that the forest and he were different. The clearing had witnessed his transformation, but what he had carried with him could not be erased. The fight against the darkness would change him forever. As he walked out of the clearing, Clara's image still lingered in his mind, a sweet yet painful memory. He remembered her smile, the way she illuminated his days, but at the same time, the loss of her hit him like a cold wave. Edgar knew that although he had won the battle, the cost had been high. The entity not only represented his weaknesses, but also the absence of Clara and the pain he carried. He wondered if her spirit, somewhere, might be at peace, now that he had faced his demons. The mystery of what had happened to her still hung over him like a fog that wouldn't dissipate. He didn't have all the answers. In the days that followed, Edgar struggled to adapt to his new reality. Life went on, but he was marked. The people around him noticed the change in his gaze, the way he seemed distant, as if carrying an invisible weight. He tried to smile, to engage in conversations, but there was a shadow in his heart that never stopped whispering. The echoes of the battle in the clearing haunted him, reminding him that he had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, but that didn't mean he was free. One night, as he watched the full moon, Edgar felt a wave of nostalgia. He remembered all the plans he had with Clara, how they dreamed together, and now all that seemed distant, like a memory from another time, another man. He knew he needed to deal with the pain of loss, but the emotional scars were a heavy burden. He wondered if he would ever truly move on, or if he would always be haunted by what he had lost. The forest, still untouched and full of life, had become both a refuge and a reminder. Edgar often returned to the clearing, not to fight, but to reflect. He would sit in silence, listening to the sounds of nature, trying to find meaning in it all. There, he allowed himself to feel the pain and the joy, the loss and the hope. It was a space where he could be who he truly was, without the pressure to hide his scars. Over time, Edgar began to understand that the scars were not just marks of pain, but also of survival. They told a story, the story of a man who had faced his shadows and found an inner light. Although the darkness was never far away, he learned to live with it, to accept it as part of his journey. The mystery of Clara's loss still remained, but Edgar found a way to honor that absence. In every step he took, in every smile he shared, he carried her with him. The scars became part of his identity, a constant reminder that he was more than his weaknesses, more than his failures. He was a survivor, a man who had faced the darkness and chosen the light, even if that choice came with a price. The clearing, then, was not just a place of struggle, but a space of healing. And as Edgar continued his journey, he knew that life was a mystery in itself, filled with shadows and lights, and that true strength lay in accepting both. He would never be the same, but now that change was part of his essence, and over time he learned to dance with the darkness while keeping the light alive within him. Edgar remained in the clearing, now a sacred space in his memory, where the echoes of his battles still resonated, but in a different way. The fight he had waged was not only against the entity that reflected his weaknesses, but a deeper, more intimate battle, a war against the demons that resided in his own soul. He allowed himself to dive into his reflections, watching as the sun slowly set behind the trees, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple. That scene, so simple and beautiful, sharply contrasted with the turmoil he had experienced. He remembered the words of the entity which had struck him like sharp blades. "You are not worthy. You are not strong enough." These phrases became a torturous mantra in his mind, echoing in moments of solitude. But slowly, Edgar began to understand that those words did not define who he was. They were merely a reflection of the insecurities that had always been present, ready to be explored. The true battle had not been against the external darkness, but against the negative perception he had of himself. The pain of losing Clara was a constant, a reminder that he had not only fought against an entity, but against the longing for a life that could have been. He allowed himself to feel that pain, but at the same time, he began to realize that Clara was also a part of his healing journey. The dreams they shared, the laughter, the promises, all of that had become a light, guiding him through the darkness. Her absence was not a burden, but a presence that taught him to cherish every moment he still had in life. As night fell, Edgar reflected on what it truly meant to be a survivor. He recalled how he had felt when facing the entity, the mix of fear and courage that accompanied him. And now he knew that this courage did not come from the absence of fear, but from the willingness to face it. He had not emerged unscathed from the battle. His scars, both physical and emotional, told the story of his struggle. But these marks were also witnesses to his resilience, to his ability to carry on despite adversities. Edgar thought about the clearing and how it had become a symbol of transformation. The place that had once only held pain and struggle was now a space of peace and reflection. He realized that, just like the forest around him, he too was in a process of growth. Leaves fell, but new ones sprouted in their place, He could allow himself to feel sadness, but he could also make room for joy, for new experiences, for new relationships. Life was a cycle, and he was learning to dance with those cycles, to accept change as part of his journey. With a deep sigh, Edgar got up and began to walk out of the clearing. The weight in his chest had not disappeared, but now he carried it with a new understanding. The pain and longing for Clara would never leave him, but he had the choice of how to deal with it. He could lose himself in the darkness or allow the light of his memories to guide him. With each step he took, he remembered that true strength was not in the absence of weaknesses, but in the ability to embrace them and move forward. And as the clearing faded from his view, Edgar felt a wave of hope. The journey would not end there. There was more to discover, more to live. He questioned the future. What would his days become? What new battles would he face? And above all, how would he continue to honor Clara's memory in a world that now seemed a little more illuminated? Edgar realized that life, with all its complexities, was a gift. He allowed himself to dream again, even if cautiously. And in the stillness of the night, as the stars began to shine in the sky, he finally felt at peace. The darkness was no longer an enemy, but part of his story, and the light, his ally. He had learned the dance of life and was ready to move on. Edgar walked through the forest, each step taking him away from the clearing that had long been the stage of his internal battle. The darkness began to spread around him, as if the night itself was approaching to envelop everything in its cloak. He stopped for a moment and looked back, feeling a mixture of nostalgia and relief. The clearing that once symbolized struggle and pain was now a space of reflection and transformation. But at the same time, a shadow of doubt settled in his heart. Had he truly overcome his demons, or had he just learned to live with them? As the gentle breeze blew through the trees, Edgar remembered how the fight against the entity had revealed his weaknesses, but also his strengths. He had faced fear, but now he found himself immersed in a new concern. What would happen when the adrenaline of battle faded, and if the echoes of that fight returned to haunt him in the loneliest hours? The future seemed like a blank canvas, but also a potential battlefield. He continued on his path, his mind filled with conflicting thoughts. With each step, memories of Clara arose like flowers blooming in barren soil. She had always believed he was stronger than he thought. But if he was truly that strong, why did he still feel the shadow of doubt so close? Edgar stopped again, looking at the sky that was beginning to fill with stars. The beauty of the moment was almost unreal, as if the universe was trying to tell him something, but he couldn't decipher the message. The clearing, now distant, was a vivid reminder of his struggles and victories. But as the night deepened, he began to wonder, what did it really mean to win? He had defeated the entity, but what about the battles he still fought within himself? What would he do when the voices of doubt returned to whisper in his ears, like a distant echo growing ever closer? Edgar pressed on, his mind restless, until he heard a familiar sound. It was the rustling of leaves, but also a whisper that seemed to come from deep within the forest. He hesitated, feeling a chill run down his spine. Was it possible that the demons he had faced had not retreated, but were merely hiding in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike again? A sense of terror settled in, but he remembered his courage. The way he had faced the darkness before, he could not allow fear to paralyze him. With a conscious effort, he took a deep breath and decided to continue. But as the night grew denser, Edgar realized that the line between reality and illusion began to blur. Strange sounds seemed to echo around him, as if the forest were alive and attentive to every move he made. He was no longer alone, and the feeling that something was watching him quickened his pace. The darkness became more oppressive, and insecurity enveloped him like a fog. Edgar wondered if the clearing had truly been a place of healing, or just a disguised trap. The memories of Clara, which once comforted him, now seemed to remind him of the fragility of life and the inevitability of loss. The pain of longing returned, mingled with the fear of the unknown lurking in the darkness. Deep down, he knew the struggle was far from over. The demons he had faced were just part of a much larger whole. And as he walked, the forest around him seemed not only to watch him, but also to challenge him to confront not only the ghosts of the past, but also the uncertainties of the future. Edgar found himself facing a dilemma. He could let himself be consumed by fear and doubt, or he could continue to seek the light amid the darkness. As the night deepened, the line between what was real and what was imaginary became ever more tenuous. Edgar wondered if, at the end of his journey, he would find the peace he longed for, or if the darkness would consume him, leaving only echoes of his existence. And so, he moved forward, a traveler in a world of shadows and light, unsure if the dawn awaiting him would bring hope or just more questions. Now he invited each of you to reflect. What would you do when facing your own demons? How would you deal with the darkness that resides in all of us? Share your experiences and reflections in the comments. Each interaction helps create a space for dialogue and understanding, where we can together confront our uncertainties. Like and subscribe for more stories that explore the mysteries of life and the soul. Your voice is important, and the journey has only just begun.